Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this session of Industry Advice. So, today's topic is about humility and failure. I recently made a post on LinkedIn about a lesson in humility because it was a case of where I kind of rejected a tool upon cursory glance because it didn't fit into my workflow, my view of how I troubleshoot. And I, 2 years later, I learned that I probably shouldn't have done that. Right. And this session is about failure, like I said. Oh, before we talk about failures, remember that the Wireshark session, the blue session, not the green session, will finally get to the actual mechanics of how to use Wireshark. We'll go into some of the UI, how to set it up, why you set it up the way you do, some tips and tricks related to that, some gotchas that you should be aware of. We'll quickly go through those topics, and then we'll finally get into packet analysis, so it's not too far off. And for those of you that stuck with me, thanks for sticking with me, and hopefully the Wireshark sessions will be productive. So why are we talking about failures today? Because when you see people present any kind of industry, events or Shark Fest, you're seeing the best possible light. It's things that are teed up, things that are prepared. It's like a cooking show, right? It's nobody ever goes to a cooking show and then they take it out of the oven and it's burnt to a crisp. We're having Cajun tonight, boys. None of that, right? It's best possible way. And in fact, apologies to past marketing folks that I've worked with. It drives them crazy because I have no notes in my presentation. And I do it extemporaneously because otherwise I turn into a bad actor reading a script on a scrolling screen. So, and every time they say, "Oh, that was great. Do you want to run through the practice again?" And we can, but then the script's going to change, and I'll, because it's boring for me to be constantly regurgitating the same old things, right? So, I like to speak extemporaneously, and these sessions are extemporaneous as well. So, anyway, why do I want to talk about failure? Because everybody has them, and this may seem a little odd, but it reminds me, it has the same feel as when people used to drink a lot. I know I certainly did. Everybody probably did, if not in school or as young adults growing up. And there's always that one drink that if you drink this, it's going to take you over the edge. And yet you do it. Well, because you're young and stupid. The old enough to know better, young enough not to care stage. Troubleshooting is a little bit like that. There's always that niggling feeling of, "Oh, I should go down this rat hole," but you don't because you're pressed for time, what have you. And almost always, it turns out that was the root cause, and it would have saved you a lot of heartache, pain, and time if you had listened to your gut feel. So why don't we do that? Why don't people do that? Because it's a fine balance between going down every rat hole and finding the right one. And that comes with practice. That comes with feel. I call it technical ESP. Some of you may have different words for it. But you just have to develop it. There's no way someone can teach you that. But tools are there to help you as a force multiplier. You want the tool to be able to bring to front and center the things that matter the most. And that was what the LinkedIn post that I made about lesson in humility. That's what it was titled. You can Google that and read up on that. Okay. So why do I want to talk about failures? Because it's important. I want you to know that everybody falters. There's a saying that in Korea, there's a saying, even a monkey falls off a tree every now and then, right? And sometimes that happens. So I wanted to recount some of the things that are still painful for me. There was one time, I'll start way, way back. One time where I kind of piped up and said something that I shouldn't have because someone else was getting, a brutal beatdown, verbal beatdown. And it was in the Army, and I spoke up and said, "Here, I got it. Let me take us out of this situation." And I didn't quite know because I wasn't paying attention from a land nav perspective. And I said, but this other lieutenant was getting a brutal, brutal beatdown. And I said, "I got it. Let's go. Follow me." And I was wrong. And we ended up patrolling for hours because because I just wanted to deflect that situation and say I thought I remembered where we were, and I didn't, and my nickname became Wrong Way Bay. So I still remember that. I remember another case where I shut down the wrong server, and this with Hughes Missile Systems. I had secret clearance. I had I just gotten out of the army. I had my clearance with me, so I was able to work on classified data center. And I shut down the NetWare server, Novell server. I walked away because it takes a while to dismount all those volumes. And I came back, and the server was still running, and I was like, oh, I could have sworn I said down. So I typed down and hit enter. And over here on my peripheral vision, I see that exit to DOS message. And I was like, oh no, I downed the wrong server. So that happened. And good thing was it was in change control window, so no one really freaked out. But it could have been really bad, right? There was another time where I saw something and I got interrupted and I didn't pursue it when I came back. And the client paid a lot of money for the investigation of slowness. And it was that one connection that I didn't follow up on that was a root cause. Eventually I found it, but it took me a couple of iterations to get there. And it occurred to me that, I postulated all these different things about what could be wrong, this could be wrong. And here's the thing about packet analysis. If you really want to, you can pick out 10, 15, 20 things that is not the root cause, but it all helps. Okay, it helps with the performance, it helps with this or that, but that's not the smoking gun, or as close to smoking gun as you can find it. And things like that have happened. The other one was there was a problem. It was about it was a go live situation where they're running out of time. They couldn't get things to work. They didn't know why there was this mysterious 45-second delay. And I said, oh, as long as it's repeatable, you can find it, right? Anything that's repeatable, if you look hard enough, you can find it. And it was a go live for a large application in a big, big country. And I got all the traces. And they said, oh, every time you log on, every other time, every third time, it's kind of, hit or miss. There's a 45-second delay. And I thought, okay, well, that's not a network delay because 45 seconds is an eternity. It's an application level delay. They didn't like hearing that. But I said, there's nothing in the network that can hold things for 45 seconds. Nothing. It just can't happen. And I said, but we'll find it because it's, but the problem was that it's a large application with, reverse proxy and forward proxy and load balancers and another load balancer. There's multiple layers of complexity. And I got packet traces from all of it. And I was going through that. And let me silence the phone there. And so, where was I? The large packet trace that I saw, I got them and I started looking through it, and I realized there were calls for DNS sometimes. Other times there were no DNS calls, and I said, oh, I found it. Root cause. I said, hey, some of your systems are using etc host file, and or your resolver is for DNS configuration is incorrect, and it's going to the host file first and not DNS. Others are using DNS, etc. I said, problem solved. And everybody was like, yay. And I wrote my report and said, case closed. And then they called and said, oh, man, Hansang, he goes, you're right. There were a bunch of discrepancies in the host file. We cleaned all that up. Thank you. And I said, awesome. You're welcome. And they said, but we're still having an issue. And I was like, really? And so, remember, everybody's like, yay, problem solved. And so now problem's not solved. And what it was the one connection that I meant to follow up on that I never did, and it was a reset. It was one reset, right? So again, SSL application, people reset the connection to close instead of closing. That's what browsers do. And my mistake was that this wasn't a browser condition. Okay, this was not front-end communication. This was back-end communication. So in a back-end communication, a reset is something that I should have looked at. And while the other host files being cleaned up did make a difference for all these niggling delays and timeouts and whatnot, the root cause of that 45-second was actually that reset. And what happened was they forgot to they took the server out of rotation, the load balancer out of rotation, but they never updated the load balancer configuration, and they didn't have the heartbeat check on. So the load balancer was like, okay, you're up next. Open a connection, open a connection, open a connection, reset. Okay, and that was essentially the 45-second delay. That's the thing that annoyed me, because it took too long for me to remember the context. No front-end communication, no users, therefore no browsers, therefore all resets are something you should follow up on, and I didn't. So that annoyed me. There was another one where we're making a change, network change, router change, and I was teaching someone, and the person said, hey, can I, so I was explaining what was happening, and they were doing it, and there was, hey, what if we did this? And it was somewhat innocuous. And I said, we shouldn't, because we're in a change control window, but since you ask, this is what happens. And I typed the commands to show them the effects of a change or whatnot. And then that dreaded enter key that doesn't respond, right? Network people know what I'm talking about. And you hit enter, and then you're like, oh, please come back, please come back, please come back, please come back. And it did. After it reconverged, it came back, and there was a bunch of carriage returns. And that was a sinking feeling of, oh man, I deviated a little bit from the prescribed change that I wrote, and there was an unintended consequence. Again, change control window, there was no users affected. But what if it didn't come back, right? Well, it would have been okay, I suppose, because I always do reload in 30, reload in 50, whatever. And so if something goes horribly wrong, the router will reload itself. So you can kind of go back to known state and start over. But it's a very sinking feeling. But the biggest mistake of my career was the perfect storm. So I was a consultant. Then I became an employee. And as a result of that, even though I had a chain of command that I reported into as a consultant, it's different when you become an employee. And so I reported into my manager, John, and he was meeting with his new boss because there was a merger between two companies. And this was a day that my boss, John, was going to go meet with his boss. And she knew of me, because I was working as a consultant, so I was kind of freelancing between both parties there, that were involved in the mergers and acquisitions. And I was troubleshooting a problem of Smith Barney branch, and there was a constant report of slowness from this branch, and it had to do with internet, and it's a hard thing to troubleshoot because there's a proxy involved, there's a firewall involved, and then there's the internet itself, and of course the application that people are accessing. There's a lot. It's a very complex thing to troubleshoot. So it was on my way home. This particular branch was in Penn Station, actually, and it was on my way home from commute. So John said, "Hey, on your way home, can you stop by the branch and see what's up, and open up a case with operations, get some packet capture, and see what you can see?" I said, "Sure, no problem." So I called up the help desk of the Smith Barney branch. His name was Aaron, and he said, "Yep, I'll come with you." And on our ride up, he asked me, "Hey, the thing that you're going to do is not really dangerous, right? Because it's not disruptive or anything." I said, "Nah, packet capture spanning is about as innocuous as you can. And in fact, it's so safe that as policy, we can do it in the middle of the day. It's quote unquote network change, but we can do it in production time because it's so safe." Yeah, that's foreshadowing. Now, the perfect storm that I was talking about was also not just the manager, my manager meeting his manager for the very first time, right as I entered the Smith Barney branch, but I had forgotten what I always railed against, which is turning off safety things like spanning tree, um, because spanning tree is there for a reason, right? It's there to prevent a loop from forming, etc. And I always said, our standards is no spanning tree to save what? A Ethernet frame every 2 seconds. Like it's like saying you're not paying insurance to your car because you're not going to get into an accident. Anyway, that's kind of the background story to it. But I get on and I connect my laptop running Wireshark, Ethereal, maybe Ethereal at the time, Wireshark maybe, I can't remember. Maybe I brought a sniffer, I don't even remember. And I checked my MAC address. I saw the MAC address, the target MAC address that I wanted to see, and then I called up operations and say, hey, I got a ticket here. Open up this span port from here to here. And at least it was after market close. I think it was like 4:10 or 4:15. And all of a sudden, the sniffer goes to line rate, 100% utilization. And I said, oh, hey, Aaron, hey, I think I found the problem, man. I said, there's something here that's completely eating up the bandwidth to a point where it's starving everybody else out. And then that little spidey sense said, what are the chances that it goes to line rate the minute you told operations to do a span port? And then it hit me. I didn't check properly. It was what I would call the U design, right? 2 routers, 2 switches, and Ethernet trunk between the two. And what I did was I created a loop by spanning one of the Ether channel ports and onto itself, essentially, because I saw my MAC address, but I didn't see the MAC address. It was coming across that trunk. And I formed a loop, and lo and behold, there's no spanning tree to prevent that from happening. And how do you get out of a spanning tree? I shouldn't say spanning tree loop. It's a misnomer. A bridge loop? Well, you can't. Why can't you get out of a bridge loop? Well, if you're an IP packet, you can get out of it because there's time to live, right? IP headers have a time to live, and after 4 hops, it dies. But what happens if you create a loop of an IP packet or even Ethernet frames like Cisco Discovery Protocol or spanning tree BPDUs? Ethernet frames don't have a time to live. And also IP packets TTL doesn't decrement if you stay inside the switch. So imagine these are the 2 switches and the IP packets are going around and around. It never dies, and it's going around as fast as it can. So the only way to recover from that is to either unplug or turn off the switches and reset. And that's what we did. Of course, by this time, the branch manager is freaking out, like everybody lost their connection, what's going on? And I was told this was not disruptive. And I was like, oh, crap. So this was before texting, I think. Or maybe it was, texting was there. Anyway, so I texted my message. I said, hey, John, I know you're in a meeting with your boss, but I just brought down the branch. He's like, what? And so I get a call. He puts it on speaker. So John was meeting with Meredith. I'll just use her first name, Meredith. And said, hey, John, Meredith, a little awkward. I know we're meeting for the first time from a chain of command perspective, but I just brought down Smith Barney, 100% my fault, and this is what happened. And did I think I was going to get fired? Possibly. But I did have a ticket open. At least I did that. So I had a little bit of error cover. And I remember Meredith said, shit happens. Don't worry about it. Just recover as fast as you can. And I was like, oh, phew, okay. But I felt bad because it's, my actions were a reflection on John as he's meeting with Meredith. And I kind of brought that down, if you will, by bringing down the branch. So to this day, that bothers me. Because if I had taken a half a second more, I would have been more thorough and I wouldn't have brought that down. I also talk about, that failure from my other hobby, which is woodworking, as you guys may know. And every time I do a cut on a table saw, I always make sure that I visualize the cut first. I know situational awareness of where my hand is, where the blade is, and sometimes I make a practice cut so I know the sequence of events. So I'm very methodical like that. I plan things out. But because I got arrogant, because I knew what I was doing, because I've been doing this forever, I circumvented the safety checklist that I always say you should follow through on. And I paid dearly. And while that didn't, they didn't fire me, and rightfully so, if they fired me, I would have complained. It was a fireable offense, okay? What I felt bad about was that I put John, a friend of mine and my boss, in a bad situation, right? So I brought harm to somebody else. And to this day, that bothers me more so than the fact that I screwed up. Now, everybody makes a human mistake. It's okay. That's fine. But it's not okay if you short circuit your own processes because you think you know better, right? And that's that back to a lesson in humility where people who've been doing woodworking lose their hands all the time because it's that moment of inattention. Same thing when you're doing changes. Same thing when you're troubleshooting. It's that moment of inattention that brings that can change the course of your events or hand. And I apologize for my PC blinking here. I thought I muted everything. So again, the point of this thing is that not everybody's perfect. You should, however, do everything you can to minimize damage that you can do from a mistake with a checklist. Every network change that you should have a checklist. Okay, so that just like every pilot has a checklist when they take off and land, every military equipment, it's called a -10, right? PMCS, Preventative Maintenance Checks and Services, -10 level, where someone reads out, check this, check this, check this, check this, before you actually use it. Again, because lives are dependent on this thing. So be in the habit of creating a checklist, whether you're troubleshooting, whether you're making a change, so that you don't make that I know better. Okay. And then the final thing that I'll talk about is there was another point in my career where I had a lot of experience, taking care of something. And there was that one person in the room who said, Hansang, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been doing this 15 years. I know what I'm doing. And my retort at the time, because my cup kind of runneth over, was, just because you've been doing it for 20 years doesn't mean you've been doing it right for 20 years. And everybody in the room went, ooh, ouch, burn. But I was in the right, okay? And the reason why I spoke up wasn't because that was important, that I was right was important, because I knew it would bring harm to the project we were working on, right? I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to bring harm because I just needed to stand up and say, no, absolutely not. That's incorrect, and this is why. And once I explained it all, everybody came around. So when you're explaining things to people, don't be holier than thou. Nobody likes that. Be factual, and also listen, because they may have a point that you didn't consider yourself. Okay, a lot of times we get into that frame of reference of I'm right, I know what I'm doing, and we get that tunnel vision. So, circling back to that LinkedIn article that I talked about, right? Lesson in humility. That's what happened. That's what happened with net data as a tool. I discounted it, and now 2 years later, I'm realizing, but that really could have helped me in some of these cases, right? So now I'm kind of gorging on some of the videos and whatnot. So essentially, what I'm saying is, no matter how good you are, no matter what expert level you're at, you can do better, you can learn more, and above all, don't make stupid mistakes. Mistakes that can be prevented with a simple checklist, with a simple flowchart, simple walkthrough, a mental walkthrough in your head, and don't be Leroy Jenkins, right? And if you don't know that reference, go ahead and Google Leroy Jenkins, and I'm sure you can watch the video. It was the first viral video, I guess, before the word viral was even there. So don't be Leroy. And with that, I'll sign off, and I'll start to work on the actual Wireshark course. That'll go up in a couple of days. maybe a week. It's a pretty hectic week coming up. So, but it won't take that long. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks. Take care. Have a great weekend.